Hi YouTube. It's been a minute. Um, I was gonna make a video about Anora back when I watched it like a month and a half ago or whatever, but it just kept getting away from me. And then it's been back in conversation recently, and I was like, all right, fine, I'll give my thoughts. So I kind of didn't like it. I know that's gonna be really surprising to everyone who watches my videos about how much I love everything. Um, and that I'm not a hater at all. Like, I know. Like, the fact that I'm being a hater right now is really surprising to everyone. But the way that I didn't like Anora, I feel like is pretty different than the way that I don't like a lot of things, in that I'm kind of cautious about my dislike for it because Anora, to me, felt like a kind of iteration on a very specific phenomenon that I've noticed in media of the last 5 to 10 years. It's kind of, I was at work today and people were talking about Anora and someone described it as Euphoria-esque. And I really see that, in that you have a kind of meeting of this kind of edgelord sensibility around women and around sex and drugs, specifically those three things, combined with a ostensible semi-feminist or progressive leaning. Like, Sean Baker, the director of Anora, has made a couple movies about sex workers and sex work, from my understanding. And so there's this sense of like, oh, this is a character study. Like, we're delving into the lives of these women who have been in some ways neglected by our culture, like that we haven't, decided that we want to study their lives in the same way we've studied the lives of people in other professions or whatever. But I honestly feel that Anora is not as different from previous media about sex work than maybe the director would want people to think. And that, my main criticism in that lane, comes in the fact that the main character, Anora, doesn't feel like a main character. She has very little agency, it feels like, and the agency that she does have is, you never really know why she does any of the things that she does in the movie. I know, that's just my interpretation. Like, someone else might have watched the movie and come away with it being like, I feel like I know exactly why she did everything that she did. But I feel like her as a person was just given so little context. There were so few moments where I actually was like, I can see into her mind. Like, I know why she's the perspective character. It felt much more like there was a kind of weird objective framing on the film. Like, it really did not feel like a character study at all. It felt like it was following this woman through a series of events that she was kind of involved with, right? Like, I really didn't appreciate the way that she had so little characterization. Like, you didn't really know, like, who were her friends, like, why were they friends. She was like somewhat friendly with a woman she worked with, and she hated another woman she worked with, and you never really, it was never deeper than that. Like, the one conversation that she had where I'm pretty sure the movie passes the Bechdel test is like, she comes home from work and her flatmate's like, did you pick up milk? And she's like, no, I didn't, fuck you. And it's like, could we have had maybe an interaction where the flatmate is like, hey, I heard that your mom's in the hospital again? Or could we have, could she call home? Could she call her sister? Could she buy something for herself at a store? Could she do literally anything? Could she talk to a cashier? Could we get some kind of interaction that revealed more about her backstory? You know, I'm not saying that every movie about sex work has to be a sob story about how someone got into sex work, but you do watch it and you're like, why'd she get into sex work? Like, if that's what the movie's about, I feel like that should be something that we maybe have some kind of inkling towards. Like, is she a sex worker because she likes the job? Like, that's another thing I felt like was really missing from Anora, is any glimpse into how Anora felt about being a sex worker. Like, you get that she's happy to leave, in a way, but you don't get the sense that she hates the job in the first place. Like, there's not a scene where she's like crying in the bathroom after a man was mean to her. There's like a scene where a man kind of plays off the fact that he has a family at home, and she's just like, oh, ha ha, hee hee. And it's like, are we gonna like think about this anymore? Or is it just like, oh, here's another sordid, sexy tale of something happening in the underbelly of New York City? It's like, it feels like the movie cares more about aesthetic and titillation than it does about any deeper investigation of any of the things it's supposed to be about. Like, the idea that it's a Cinderella story was initially something like a modern Cinderella story. I was like, oh, yay. But again, there's no evil stepmom, there's no evil stepsisters, there's no dead mom, there's no, like, those are actually a huge part of the original Cinderella story. Like, the original Cinderella story is not about a girl who just happened to be poor and then ended up marrying a prince, and that was cool. Like, it was about how she was kind through a bad situation that was put on her by her father and her mother dying. It was a story about a cascading series of tragedies that led to a woman who should have been cruel, should have been made unkind, sticking it out and getting something nice. And that's really not at all, not at all what Anora was, right? And I was actually emboldened to make this video by a YouTuber I like tweeting about how Anora is about a mark, and I use the word mark a reasonable amount, but nobody ever knows what I'm talking about for some fucking reason. But like, a mark is someone who is like susceptible to scams, basically. It's like you would say an elderly person who gets a phone call that's like, hi, I'm so-and-so from so-and-so, and you owe me $50 million, and then gives the money. That's a mark, right? Anora really seemed so uncautious and unwary, and she was just like throwing herself into this marriage. You don't get the sense that she really loves him either. Like, there's not a moment in the movie where you're like, oh my god, Anora's in love. There's not like a sweet smile, there's not like a needle drop, there's not, you just don't know her. You just don't know her. The only thing you seem to get is that she's stupid. Like, kind of stupid and sad about what's happened to her, right? There's really, like, so many sex scenes between Anora and the guy, and I never got the sense that she was either liking or not liking it. There's the moment where she's like, hey, it would be nicer if it went slower. Or like, it could go, we could have sex for longer if you went slower. And she's telling him that. And then there's no image of her face. She doesn't really show in any way that's different than parts of the previous movie that she's enjoying herself. There's no like moan that sounds different, or look on her face that looks different, or way that she acts that's different. Like, it really doesn't feel like anything's changed in that moment. She's just given him one more thing that's nice, right? You get the sense that she likes party, that she likes being rich, but like, it's so shallow, her enjoyment. Like, there's not a moment where she like casts off her old clothes and puts on her new clothes and looks at herself in the mirror and is like, oh my god, like, look at me. It really is just like, oh, look, he's put a coat on her that's like nice. It's a nice coat. It's like, okay, and am I supposed to be excited? Am I supposed to be watching this movie just because I like seeing people be rich? Like, I'm here for you to actually be saying literally anything, and it feels like there's nothing. It feels like it's just a leering, I really want to impress that, like, I wish Anora had any context to her character whatsoever. Like, I feel like a character study like this, you want a sense of past. You want a sense of, like, the second love interest has more about his family and his economic situation put into the movie than Anora does, which feels insane. Like, why is she less clarified in her relationships with her family than he is? Like, early on in the movie, she says something about how, someone in her family didn't speak very good English, so that's why she knows Russian. And when that happened, I was like, okay, so we're gonna get a little bit into her relationship with her family, and maybe a little bit into the idea of like a child translator and how that, can fuck up a kid or whatever. And then it's never brought up again. And it's like, okay, so that was just you explaining why she can understand Russian but not speak Russian very well. So there was nothing else to this. Like, you didn't want us to know anything about her. The movie seems like allergic to actually telling us about Anora's life. And I just find that kind of misogynistic. Like, that's what it feels like. It feels like a misogynistic movie to me. And I'm really, part of the reason I didn't want to make this video is because that phenomenon I was talking about at the beginning with like this new like Euphoria, Sean Baker, whoever directed Euphoria, I don't remember his name right now, Sam Levinson, whatever that is. Part of the thing is that it's post Gamergate and post recognition of the feminist killjoy as an archetype, where people have criticized that archetype. But now it's not just that, the feminist killjoys are coming at the right, it's that the feminist killjoys come at the left too. It's like everyone now has to go with this really, at times, strained sex positivity, because it's now like the right wing, in a way, has reclaimed this idea of being, like, they're not the traditional sector anymore. They're the traditional sector in that blonde girls suck dick and spit on it. That's like the Hawk Tuah thing, Matt Bernstein has a great, like, podcast about this. There's a little bit fruity episode about the new sexual politics of the right or whatever. And it really feels like it's not a coincidence that we're having, like, this kind of movie or media come out where it's like, we're kind of progressive and we're doing something kind of progressive, but we're still like leering at women. And if you complain about it, then it's not cool of you. Like, that's always been a thing, but it feels like it's coming from different people now, which is just, yeah, that's a tangent. I think the least forgivable part of Anora was the scene where Anora's with her second love interest, and she says, and trigger warning for me saying the word, the four-letter word that rhymes with cape. So she says, she references a point earlier in the movie where this guy, like, tied her up because she was attacking him or something. The conflict was really stupid. Okay, minor tangent before I get into my last point. The stakes in this movie were just so off. Like, where were the guns? I was wondering, like, the whole midsection of the movie, I was like, where were the guns? Like, we're supposed to be going on this crazy goose chase, worried that some guy's gonna bleed out in the car through his nose because he got kicked in the face, and it's like, there's no guns? There's no fucking guns? What do you mean? These are Russian semi-mobsters in New York City, in America. Why don't they have guns? That was just felt like such a missed opportunity. And at a point, I was just like, the reason there aren't any guns is because you're not going to kill anyone. It's because no one's going to die. And knowing that no one's going to die because there are no guns, it's like, well, why do I even care about the dangerousness of the situation? Like, why are you teasing at the idea that something bad's going to happen? Like, the entire time they were going on this chase and having these fights and stuff, it just felt like slowly losing a sense of danger. It just felt like black comedy at a point, which I don't really think is what they were going for. Like, maybe at a couple points, but I was like, this is just Uncut Gems but worse. Like, that's honestly how I feel about Anora, is that it wanted so bad to be Uncut Gems, and it just was not Uncut Gems. Uncut Gems is a far superior film. But anyway, back to the scene that I found the most egregious in the entire movie. That one was the one where Anora says to this man, who is her love interest, if this other guy hadn't been there in this previous scene, you would have raped me. That's what she says to him. And I was watching that with a friend of mine, Amelia. You guys know Amelia. You might be Amelia if you're watching this. And I remember just like, I think I gasped. Like, I think it was that bad. And not in a way that I was like, oh my god, they said rape. Like, I'm not like a prude like that. Like, you guys know that I'm not offended by the idea that sexual violence exists in the world or whatever. And I don't use the word prude, whatever. You guys know what I mean. But the way that it was employed and the way they were talking about it, just, and that they had Anora saying it, I was like, this is so written by a man vibes. Because no woman would ever, in a room alone with a man, say something like, you would have raped me if XYZ. Nobody. Like, I fucking dare you to find me a woman who would say something like that. It completely took me out of the movie. Like, not even from a perspective of like, I'm like, oh, this is politically incorrect. It took me out of the movie with how unreal it felt. Like, and I talked to somebody online about this like ages ago, where they were like, I feel like she was supposed to be cruel in this scene, and she was supposed to be, kind of rebuffing him, because if the scene felt too easy, then them hooking up in the car at the end would have not felt like payoff. And I agree, and I understand that. They also weren't defending the way the scene played out. Like, the way the scene played out, it felt like just too much in a really weird, gross way. Like, it would be one thing if they had, part of the reason that she left her job was because of a threat of sexual violence. Like, it would be one thing if sexual violence was a theme that felt like it was carried through the movie, but it really didn't feel like that. Like, it didn't feel like an outburst that was warranted in any way. Like, I get saying something obscene because you are feeling like really like up in yourself. Like, there have been moments in my life where I feel like I'm possessed by like the, I just want to say the nastiest thing possible. And that felt like kind of what they were going for. But even then, I was like, no woman would say this. Like, ever. And yeah, that was kind of how I felt about the movie. TLDR, the character Anora didn't really feel like a character. Her decisions didn't really make sense. You didn't really feel like you knew what she even felt. It just felt like there were too few pieces to make up her personality in what is ostensibly a character study. Like, for a movie titled after a character, that character got so little of the movie's attention. It felt like the movie cared more about how she looked in a certain outfit than it cared about who she was. And that just feels sexist. So, peace out, team.